Let's come back to our cascading of the presentation. A hiatus like this is creative and does not interfere with the cascading of the expressiveness. This is a prayer wheel from Tibet. This particular one is made by the Buddhist family, the Sakya clan. I was fortunate enough to have a quality of being able to befriend a number of very interesting, high-powered Asian teachers and friends. Most of them were on level of friends. And one of them was Thich Thien An, and this is one of his books, Zen Philosophy, Zen Practice. And it's inscribed to Mr. Roger Weir, Best Wishes for Bodhisattva Works. Another one by him is Buddhism and Zen in Vietnam, and so forth. He had come to the United States in 1964 because the Vietnam War at that time was drawing to a kind of a closure because it had been going on with the French in Indochina for years on end. And before that, it had gone on because of the great turmoil that had happened in China and came to some kind of a conclusion in 1949 with the establishment of Mao Zedong's Red China and the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek going to Taiwan. But all of that left Vietnam into a mess, a phantasmagoria. Thien An's father was a head monk, Buddhist monk, in Saigon. And at 14, Thien An himself entered into the Sangha. And so he was like multiple generations. The father was killed. Thien An finally left to study abroad, ended up coming here to UCLA to be a guest professor. And sometime at the end of the Vietnam War for the American involvement, in the early 1970s, there was a gathering of all of the guns that were collected in all the Buddhist monasteries in the Saigon area of Vietnam, and they were melted down, and 2 peace bells were made, identical twin pairs. And they were sent to Thien An here in Los Angeles. By that time, he had founded the University of Oriental Studies and the Vietnamese Buddhist temple sanctuary, had brought in all of the different kinds of Buddhism, not only from the Theravada, the old school, but also the Mahayana, the new school, and they all were radiance around Thien An. And one of the temple bells was put into a beautiful structure in the garden of his temple complex. He kept buying houses. He would get contributions, he would buy another old house. Pretty soon he had about 7 or 8 old houses along his street and then on other streets and so forth. It was an area of Los Angeles. Maizumi Roshi Zen Center, LA, was in the neighborhood. And in this Temple Bell garden, the complement was put at the entrance to the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, and San Pedro, on a rise. And I understand from Stan here, my longtime friend, that they have rebuilt the structure that holds that Temple Bell at the entrance to the harbors of Los Angeles, Long Beach, one of the biggest harbors in the world, and it's conspicuous. The Temple Bell Garden was a place I was going to move my Bodhisattva bookstore from Pico near Bundy, which I had founded when I came down from Canada in 1975, and not just a bookstore, but a center. I brought in a high lama like Karma Tinley from Toronto, who I knew Canadian-wise, and gave 10 days of talks on the Tibetan language, on the high Dharma, on the Karmapa lineage, out of which came a book, The 16 Karmapas. Karma Tinley Rinpoche was a physician in the Kargyupa tradition, but he was also a high Dharma teacher, and eventually, because of a death in the Sakya tradition, very, very esoteric, the Gelugpa, the Nyingma, the Kargyupa, all are, he once said, they're like candles being lit from another candle. The flame carries, but the Sakya is like a cascade of water in a waterfall. You can't tell one drop from another. And he is today, approaching 80, the head Lama for the Sakya sect of Vajrayana Buddhism in the world. I was going to open the Bodhisattva bookstore in the Temple Bell Garden under Tianan and many other Buddhists that I knew, and just a couple of nights before, a saboteur came and burnt that whole structure. I had just oiled the structure with the Sakya descendant who gave me this prayer wheel, and a young Sri Lankan monk named Piyananda, who founded the Dharma Vijaya Vihara on Crenshaw near Venice Boulevard here in Los Angeles. And the three of us had just finished oiling the entire structure, and so it caught fire right away, and the entire thing burnt down, leaving the temple bell in a pile of ashes. So Tianan and Karma Tinley both said, it is time for you to go to the alternative, which was to open your bookstore, not to open your bookstore, but to finish buying a bookstore on Hollywood Boulevard, which I bought, which was a little bookstore right next to the big original Pickwick bookstore. And I was there for about 4 years. It is a quality of this high Dharma that attends not only to what can be expressed in the phonemes, in the words, in the discursive language, but in a poetic of it, where the ineffable is the pausing in the breathing. And if you go into a prana yoga, there is a breathing in and then a breathing out. Between the breathing in is a pause, and after the breathing out, there's a pause. If you're really articulate, those two pauses are open doors to the infinite field of consciousness. The way then that language shifts from a rhetorical structure of designation and meaning to a poetic where the meaning of meaning is ineffable, and one can revisit it like a prayer wheel. Om Mani Padme Hum, again and again. It's not a repetition. It is the soundlessness of hail to the jewel in the lotus, the Samkhya Gatha of the Ratna Gunas in the Prajna Paramita. And so when one comes to understand there is a quality that is mysterious, because the Theravada giving way to the Mahayana because of St. Thomas going to India and bringing with him the new way. The way not only of Jesus, but the way of Jesus in Alexandria and Mary Magdalene. A shared presence, origin. And it isn't so much that one is just married in that sharing presence, but there is a spiritual marriage in that. But there is also a preparation where you are welcomed into the community family, the community as family. And that performance, that ritual, is baptism. And in the baptism of the Mahayana, it was the ability to hear in between the breaths, not just in between the lines, but in between the breaths, so that one had the participation of coursing in the language, not just hearing, but having the both ears to hear the spaces that are eloquent but not articulate. And it is this quality then that when the Vajrayana came into being, where Tilopa, making sure that Naropa would understand by not putting theirs where there is, no ises, that you could be. And so when he was passing, a great translator from India, his name was Marpa the translator, a married Lama who had a very tough, beautiful wife who was very compassionate and very tough with Marpa was the teacher of Milarepa. So that in between Tilopa Naropa and Marpa Milarepa, yogas of based through Marpa and was a ritual ceremony of baptism, because it's by baptism that one prepared to come into a community where a spiritual family is possible, where a spiritual aspect of marriage is possible, where a spiritual aspect of friendship is possible, not only on the scale, certainly not of individuals, but on the scale of personals, tuning and sharing. And because it's in an that is cosmic. There's a galactic system. It's called the cotton. When Thomas, in his gospel, had two parts. He says at the beginning very clearly that these are the secret words which the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote. Didymus meant, in Greek, twin. Not that he was a twin of Jesus, but that he was tuned to that ineffable chiral pairing. And he said, Jesus said, whoever finds the explanation of these words will not taste death. The translation into English here of explanation is of the Greek word hermeneia. Hermeneia is not explanation. Commentaries on the highest level hermeneutics, all of it coming from hermetic, from Hermes as the psychopomp, as the guide of souls after death into rebirth. It is the way in which the ineffable aerates the breath so that it isn't just breathing air, but it is breathing prana. And when one uses a yogic deep technique called pranayama, which is prananama put together in a contraction, the prananama is using that secret infinite breath to language so that the name becomes something real. And the first person in the Bible to be able to name things is Adam. He's the atomic structure of the species. Adam, who, when he names, what he names, as he names from this comprehension, and it is real. It's not a moniker. It's not what it's called. It's what it is really. What's in a name? It can be real. This quality Thomas records in two exemplars where Mary said to Jesus, "Whom are thy disciples?" Matithis. Matithis means learners. They aren't disciples. Who are your learners? Who's learning? And she says, "Whom are thy learners like?" And he said, "They are like little children who have installed themselves in a field which is not theirs. When the owners of the field come, they will say, 'Release us to our field.' They take off their clothes before them to release it to the field to them, to give back their field to them. Therefore I say, if the Lord of the house knows that the thief is coming, he will stay awake before he comes, and will not let him dig through into his house of his kingdom to carry away the goods." This is how the Vajrayana was passed on from Tilopa to Naropa to Marpa to Milarepa to an incredible genius named Gampopa, who was a master of all the sutras, of all of the tikas, of all of the writings, and yet he couldn't enter into the field. He couldn't have the pivotal rest. So he went to study with Milarepa, whose monastery was on Mount Everest. He was so huge in capacity that his temple was Mount Everest. It can be that scale and more. Gampopa went for years and then finally began to have a series of dreams, and each time the dreams became more intense, more grandiose, more packed, complex. Finally, he woke Milarepa in the middle of the night, and he said, I'm having these dreams. Well, tell me your dreams. And he told him the dreams, and Milarepa nodded and then said, go back to sleep. And night after night, he began to wake him up, and each time Milarepa said, no, go back to sleep. Finally, Milarepa got a night's sleep, and Gampopa, dejected, was preparing to leave because he'd had no dream at all. And Milarepa smiled. Years later, Gampopa heard that Milarepa had died, and that his chance for enlightenment was gone. And he sighed deeply. And he went out his door, and the entire valley was filled with about 5,000 yogis studying under Gampopa the techniques of Milarepa, that he had been past the high Dharma and didn't know it, because it's not knowable. There's no gnosis for the high Dharma. There's a gnosis about truth, but not wisdom. There's no gnosis for wisdom. The Gnostics are half right, which means they're half wrong also. Forget it. Yeah, the transgression is not that the Gnostic myth is so wrong, the myth of Sophia. It's that it's only half right. Sophia has a shared presence pairing yet to occur. It is a quality where Thomas, at the very end of his gospel, says, Simon Peter said to them, because Mary and Jesus were together, and Simon Peter comes in. He was like a burly truck driver type character, fisherman in the most graphic sense. Simon Peter said to them, let Mary go out from among us, because women are not worthy of the life. Jesus said to him, see, I shall lead her, so that I will make her male, that she too may become a living spirit. The Greek word is pneuma. Not that she will become a man or a male, but just as males become pneuma, spirits, she will become a spirit, resembling you males, because there's no difference in the spirit between male and female. They are both and all capable of being in registry, a high Dharma quality of our species. And all aliens may come here and mess with Homo sapiens, even Homo sapiens sapiens, but there's no messing with Homo sapiens stellaris. We're as capable as anyone of being the teachers. And so listen up. It's not just a Marine Corps saying. It goes for all and every so-called alien. To what are you alien to? There's nothing to hear. The quality of Mary Magdalene comes through in her Odes of Solomon. And here reprinted is after almost 40 years, James H. Charlesworth's translation of the Odes of Solomon. He doesn't know they're by Mary Magdalene. Nobody does but me. And she, and Jesus, and Thomas, and so forth. This was republished by an old friend of mine, John Whiff, and his partner. And John Whiff owns the Archives bookstore. It's in Pasadena, up on West Washington Avenue. I bought books there for decades. And it is published in 2009 because this is the 100th anniversary of the discovery of the Odes of Solomon. A English Celtic academic named Rendell Harris, with the initial J. Rendell Harris. And he was a specialist in languages, Hebrew, Syriac, etc. And he was in his study in Manchester, and he had a few hours, and he was looking at the stacks of manuscripts on a shelf that had not been looked at and dealt with, and he went over to one stack, sheaf of manuscript, and he read one, and he recognized that he had just read that particular hymn, that particular ode, in a book. And he went over and found, right, and the Pistis Sophia is spiritual dialogues. It's the dialogues of those in the community of the blessed, in the high Dharma species of mankind, and who are asking, like in the Gospel of Thomas, of Jesus, of various things. And Jesus is giving them a chance to make a hermeneia, an in-depth understanding in a high Dharma, breathless way, the meaning inside the subatomic structure of that language. And most of what is being used are the Psalms of David, the Psalms of King David, the royal Psalms very frequently. And they would give the hermeneia of this, and Jesus would then approve and go on, and the next person would come in. And 5 times in the Pistis Sophia, because all the sources are cited, Odes of Solomon are cited 5 times, 5 different odes. And Rendell Harris realized the manuscript he had contained almost all of the 42 Odes of Solomon. And in 1909, he published, I have a copy I'll bring in next week, a little hardcover of a selection right away of the Odes of Solomon, the earliest Christian hymnal. That these are hymns before there's a Christianity. These are hymns from the communities of the Spirit gathered around the living Jesus. Here is one of them. This is Ode 16. Charlesworth has put a title on this for this edition. My Work is the Lord's Psalm, as a title. In the odes, they're just numbered. As the work of the plowman is the plowshare, and the work of the helmsman is the steering of the ship, so my work is the psalm of the Lord and his praises. I write the poetic to carry the sharing. In his praises are my art and my service, because his love has nourished my heart, and his fruits he poured unto my lips. Now you can speak, not just the truth, but in high Dharma. For my love is the Lord, hence I shall sing to him. For I am strengthened in his praises, and I have faith in him. I shall open my mouth, and his spirit shall speak through me the glorious praise of the Lord and his beauty, the work of his hands and the service of his fingers, for the multitude of his mercies and the strength of his word. And the word of the Lord investigates the invisible and perceives his thought, for the eye sees his works, and the ear hears his thought. As the Vajrayana came into being of the Mahayana, Tilopa had a very esoteric document that for the very first time was printed in Sanskrit. It had never been printed before because the manuscripts, high Dharma manuscripts, are very rare. There's no corporation, there's no academician troth by which they were preserved. And in 1941, this was published in Baroda. The Maharaja, the Gaiwak's Oriental series, published it in 1941, actually had been started in 1936 by this young, beautiful, intellectual genius. And it was translated into English by him, started to be Mario Corelli. Corelli was a student of Giuseppe Tucci, who was the great, masterful high Dharma teacher in Italy at the time. The translation was interfered with because Italy became fascist under Mussolini, and nothing was able to be done. Canelli was jailed along with other people, not because they were fascists, but because they were anti-fascists. And so finally in 1941, it was published in the treatise by Naropa, Sekodisa Tika. A tika is a short commentary. Sekodisa is baptism. It is Naropa's presentation of tantric baptism with its commentary. How does a baptism get into the Vajrayana when 1,000 years have gone by between Naropa and St. Thomas? You're going to have to come next week to find out. That's all, folks.